Hi everyone, it's Rio Cloud. So in today's session, we're going to have a quick look at Microsoft Purview, or previously known as the Microsoft Compliance Portal. The Purview portal is a converged portal experience of both the old Microsoft 365 Compliance Portal and the Microsoft Azure Compliance Portal. It brings together all the tools and data that are needed to help understand and manage an organization's compliance needs. The Compliance Portal is available to customers with a applicable Microsoft 365 SKU and with one of the following roles, whether or not that be Global Administrator, Compliance Administrator, Compliance Data Administrator, and any of the unified RBAP roles within the Microsoft Purview portal itself. And like I said, the importance of Microsoft Purview is becoming more and more drastic, especially around AI adoption and Microsoft 365 Copilot, with organizations having to now adopt Microsoft Purview as their go-to data governance and data security solution, right? And there's a whole load of different solutions within Microsoft Purview, whether or not that's information protection for automatic classification and application of encryption through rights management. We've also got data loss prevention, which is the ability to reduce data exfiltration and data exposure outside of your known organizational boundary. We've got insider risk management, which is looking at inadvertent sharing of sensitive information based on exfiltration activities, such as a particular user downloads 10,000 files from a document library in SharePoint over a period of, let's say, 2 hours, right? We've got AI Hub, which is now called DSPM for AI, or Data Security Posture Management for AI, which is looking at not only, let's say, generative AI usage in our organization, whether or not that be Microsoft 365 Copilot or third-party generative AI usage, such as ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or Poly, but we can also view the prompts, the output of the prompts, the user activity, the timestamp associated. It gives us data assessment reports around particular SharePoint sites and sharing links, sensitive items which live within that particular site itself, and if external sharing is on at site level. And then, of course, we've got the unified audit, which is all around activities, interactions, and timestamps. And of course, it can go back up to 180 days. Now, this is the Microsoft Purview portal from a, let's say, a high-level perspective. There's a whole load more solutions within the Microsoft Purview portal, but today, of course, we're going to be looking at information protection. We're going to be looking at data loss prevention and also DSPM for AI. Of course, Copilot is very much at the forefront of most organizations' minds at the moment, or strategies moving forward. And I think there's a leading stat out there at the moment that 70 to 80% of organizations are using some sort of AI. But of course, Copilot itself and AI is not the project. The project in itself is the data exercise. It's a data governance. It's a data security. Fundamentally, it's the data, right? So we have to, let's say, grasp not only where our data lives, but what type of data we're handling and processing and how we go about protecting that data. So this moves me on to the second slide, where we start looking at, okay, so how do we think about this? How do we go about this before we dive into any of the demos within the Microsoft Purview portal? Well, typically, if you've ever looked at the defense in depth chart topology, where physical security is number one, then we've got identity and access, and it trickles down all the way to data, because of course, we're putting a series of mechanisms in place to protect our underlying data. Why? Well, the shared responsibility and the service models always dictate that the customer is always responsible for the data, right? And data protection is exactly what we're trying to exhibit in this particular scenario. Now, the first point of call whenever we're trying to manage and protect data, or even just identify data, is understanding our data estate. Where does our data live? It can live in many different places, whether or not that be Microsoft 365, albeit OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online, Exchange Online. This typically is native. There's a native integration within the Microsoft 365 service portfolio, where in which we don't need to set up anything. All the telemetry is already sent in to the Microsoft Purview portal. We have third-party connectors. Third-party connectors could be Salesforce, ServiceNow, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, right? These are all third-party data sources where data could be held or stored, right? Which in this case we still want to be able to identify, assess, and protect. So what we do is we set up connectors for the individual data sources and ingest that data into Microsoft Purview. We've got on-prem repositories such as SMB file shares, SharePoint server, anything locally outside of, let's say, Microsoft Cloud. We can install the Azure Information Protection Scanner, which allows us then to identify, classify, and protect that data which falls outside of the Microsoft 365 service boundary. And then finally, devices, right? We can store data on our physical endpoints, on our physical VDI, or our VDI solutions, whether or not that be Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365. As long as we push out the MDE agent for Defender for Endpoint, and we onboard our devices, and we push out the Purview browser extension, we're good to go. And we're able to also protect that data on those physical endpoints. Now, like I said, this is how I want you to think about it. The data estate. Where is our data stored and how can that be managed moving forward? The next step is data discovery, right? What type of data are we handling? What type of data are we managing? What type of data are we protecting? And the way we go about that is by creating what we like to call sensitive information types in our organization, or also known as SITs. And this can be created in a proliferation of different ways. One, we can create regular expressions, which let's sit back slightly. An example would be, we know a MasterCard starts with this, ends with this, and has this amount of numerical characters. We can look at that and we can use that sensitive information type to find that information in our business. Keyword match, dictionary and function, very similar in the way in which they work, where in which we're looking for maybe a particular word, a particular string. It could be we're looking for an account number, right? We're looking for a name of a place, right? Or a particular animal. We can create that as a keyword match and we can use that to find information in our business. A dictionary function is very similar. It's just a list of keywords. Whether or not that's case sensitive or insensitive, it doesn't really matter, right? We can also enhance on top of the standardized sits in which we can create what we like to call a primary and supplementary element. Primary element meaning, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a regular expression of a credit card number. However, not only that, let's say we've got an email, a credit card number is present, right? But we also want a supplementary kind of element to be found so that it satisfies the conditions. That could be, please see attached credit card number below. Then, albeit we can use that. We've got trainable classifiers, which is similar to the way SITs work in essence, but rather than looking for data or metadata within a particular document, we're actually looking for the document itself, right, and the document's fingerprint. So that could be maybe a painted template of some sort. It could be a new starter form. It could be a leaver form. It could be a change of job role request form. It doesn't really matter. It's the physical form itself rather than the metadata within the form. And the way in which that works, it leverages and uses machine learning algorithms in the back end, which means from an administrator perspective, I have to seed it both positive and false samples of what I'm looking for. And then over a period of 7 to 14 days, it starts to evaluate that content and starts to identify exactly what I'm looking for. EDM is exact data match, right? And this is looking for schematized data assets. In other words, databases, right? Whether or not that be relational or relational, we're looking for the schema of that database. So it could be, the schema could be first name, last name, date of birth, location, so on and so forth. We can ingest that information into Purview as an EDM and use that to find information once again across all our data estate. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because, of course, this creates the foundation of being able to create policies within Microsoft Purview, whether or not that be information protection for labeling, where we can automatically apply a label based on a sensitive information type being identified in a particular document. It could be, we're looking for particular sensitive information types which has been referenced in Copilot interactions or even ChatGPT interactions, right? We can view that information, we can view that telemetry by defining what's sensitive to our organisation or us as an organisation through DSPM for AI. And then, of course, data loss prevention could be actually we want to restrict people from, let's say, copying and pasting this sensitive information type from my device to a USB peripheral, or even better, copying and pasting this sensitive information type from my device and to a generative AI website. Okay, there's a few options around that, and it's the art of the impossible. Now, let's have a look at some of these solutions in play in a live environment, and then we'll follow on with actually configuring the particular policies. Thank you very much. So let's take a look at the output from a demo perspective. So what we're going to look at now is information protection labeling, endpoint data loss prevention, and some of the capabilities and caveats around actually deploying these solutions. So first things first, you need to navigate to portal.office.com and have the applicable privileges. In this instance, I've got global administrator rights. Okay. On the left-hand side, in the Microsoft 365 productivity suite, now known as Microsoft 365 Copilot, you want to select apps, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to open up a Word document and create a blank document. By default, this is going to be labeled as internal, because what I've done is I've defined an information protection policy in Microsoft Purview to label the document as internal use only. What we've got here is a watermark shown for internal, and also a footer which has been defined on my behalf. Now, on the top left, on the ribbon, we've got a shield icon, which states that this document is for internal use only, and it's presented a policy tip to the end user to say, this label is used when sharing information internally. Great. Now, what I've done offline outside of this video is I've defined a sensitive information type, which I'm going to show you later anyway, of the word pizza, and this is a keyword match. Right now, I've associated this keyword or this sensitive information type with the information protection labeling, and for it to apply automatic labeling to this particular document. So now, if I type in the word pizza, whether or not it's case sensitive or insensitive, it doesn't really matter. It picks up both variants. Right now, in a matter of, let's say, seconds, it should recommend to me as an end user that I change this label from internal to highly confidential, secret project did someone say food ? Of course, this is just my funny way of presenting information protection labeling in play. Of course, if you put this into a real life business context, business scenario, this could be anything, right? This could be me copying and pasting a credit card number, a social ID number, a national insurance number, an account number. We could be here all day. Different businesses will have different use cases for this. At this point in time, this is just applying a level of classification, right? There's no encryption being applied. But what I could say is, actually, if it does apply a highly confidential label based on me putting the reference of pizza in the document, that it encrypts it so that only myself and maybe another colleague can view this content, or even alternatively restrict Copilot from referencing this document completely, right? At this point in time, I'm recommending that the user applies the label, which I can do, and I can press change now. This will then change the document from internal to highly confidential and apply the custom watermark and footer, of course, I've defined for this particular label. And at the top left, you can see the shield icon, which of course states that it's highly confidential secret project, and also changes the policy tip. Now, that's great, but then how do we provide that extensibility piece around applying a level of encryption? Well, you need to define that in Purview, which I'm going to take you through. I think the key thing here is, right, that this is client-side automatic labeling, and this is included in Microsoft Business Premium, where in which I'm either creating, composing, replying to either an individual document or an email, right, on a one-to-one basis. That's automatic labeling from a client side. Service side is where we want to apply a label at scale to, let's say, 5,000 documents in a document library in SharePoint, right? That's a typical scenario. In that scenario, you would require an E5 license, right? If you want to apply labels to Teams channels or, let's say, Teams sites, you require a Teams Premium license, right? Now, that's information protection. So if I come out of here quickly, and we go back to the application pane, and now we select Teams. And what you're going to see is a whole lot of Teams messages with the reference of pizza, right? And once again, I'm going to try and type the word pizza to user 8, right? Case sensitive, insensitive, it doesn't really matter. You're going to see that it's blocked. Of course, I still have visibility in regards to the message I've sent, but the recipient wouldn't have seen that message at all. and this message would have been blocked. Now, I'm also presented once again a policy tip to say, what can I do in this case? Well, your organisation has defined a sensitive information type of pizza. This violates your organisational policy. You can customise this as you see fit, so you can put your own IT acceptable use policy here, your own branding, your own colour scheme. Art of the impossible with this, right? But once again, this is endpoint DLP as we're using it in Teams. Standard DLP, where maybe we're restricting sensitive information from being sent outside the business through Exchange or through sharing links or through OneDrive or SharePoint. That's part of Business Premium. That's not a problem at all. And if you didn't already know, Microsoft only yesterday have announced an E5 security add-on for Business Premium, which of course upgrades Entry ID Plan 1 to Plan 2. It includes Defender for Cloud Apps, upgrades Defender for 365 Plan 1 to Plan 2, so on and so forth. So you get a whole load of enhanced capabilities with the Business Premium Zero to Hero SKU, rather than having to pay the expense to go to E5, and also there's a 57% cost saving rather than paying for the individual services up front. So this was just me quickly showing you labeling and endpoint DLP. Of course, we could go a bit more extensive, but this is just a high-level overview. Of course, if I'm using Defender for Cloud Apps, I also have the ability to restrict known FQDNs, domains, categories such as gambling, social media, let's say pornographic sites. But because this is not my sandbox laptop, I can't showcase that, but of course I can actually sanction and unsanction those given applications so that it presents a smart screen to the end user and they can't access those, let's say, generative AI services where maybe data could be exposed because of course it trains the underlying large language model. Now, how do we actually go ahead and configure this stuff? Well, you need to navigate to Purview, and you've got to love Microsoft's naming conventions, purview.microsoft.com. If I can type, sorry. Like I said, you've got to be a global administrator, compliance admin, and for some of the solution areas where maybe you need to look at or review sensitive information, you need to be a list viewer. So you need to have list viewer roles in the Purview portal itself through the unified RBAC. Now you get this annoying prompt, you just want to press get started, and this will take you to the Purview portal, right? Where once this loads, you will see the solution cards down the middle, where we can, of course, initiate information protection, DLP, DSPM for AI, exactly what you saw in my PowerPoint slide, right? Now, on the left-hand side, you get the org-wide settings for the particular solution areas on the bottom left here. And we've also got the ability to assign roles, which I said you need that list viewer role to be able to view matched items and view sensitive information in the organization. We have data connectors where we can ingest third-party content from third-party data sources into Purview, and there's a list of connectors which are supported by Microsoft themselves once it decides to load. There we go. WhatsApp, Bloomberg, HR data sources, there's a whole load here. They all have their unique parameters, prereqs, and configuration. And with device onboarding. Device onboarding is important, especially when we're looking at interactions outside of the Microsoft Service portfolio and also endpoint data loss prevention, right? This requires you to onboard the devices to Defender for Endpoint, right, through the MDM Sense agent, either via Intune, Config Manager, local script, or group policy. You can also onboard VDIs as well through the VDI onboarding script. And they will then propagate and reflect over to the Microsoft Purview console, right? We've got optical character recognition, so looking at text in images or PDFs, or there's a whole load of supported file types, right? And this is built through Microsoft Syntax via an Azure subscription per 1,000 items at about $1, right? And you can enable this through the tip box here, but of course you need to enable Syntax in the admin center and associate it with an Azure subscription before you can enable this tip box, right? Now, let's get into the actual solution areas quickly, because like I said, this is a high-level overview. Now, if we select information protection, this will take us to information protection labeling, right, where we can create our labels. Now, labels from the outset are very easy to configure, which I'm going to showcase to you now. What you're going to see here is my existing labels for internal and highly confidential with the sub-label I talked about earlier, right? We've got the priorities of the label. This is important because, of course, if you ever give the ability for the user to downgrade the label at all, it will then refer back to the priority matrix. The scope of where you can use these labels, whether or not that be email items, file items, Power BI, Fabric, Azure, you scope, you define that scope, and who created it and when it was last modified. Now, if I create a label, I can give it a name. This name is what's going to be shown to you as an administrator in the Purview portal. The display name is what's going to be shown to the end user. Preferably, you want to keep this the same, right? Because of course, if you create multiple labels and there's a conflict of interest in regards to their name and display name, it's going to be a logistical nightmare, right? So keep this the same. Priority you can't change now. You have to create this post creation. Description for use, the policy tip shown to the users when, of course, they assign the label. For this instance, we're just going to show NA, and you want to keep this the same for both admins and for the end users. And then, of course, we've got the option to select the appropriate color. Funny enough, I only found out the other day you can actually change the color through PowerShell, so you can add additional custom colors if you need to. You don't actually have to select a color. You can, but to proceed, but you can pick one anyway. I'm just going to click pink or berry. Now, where do we want to assign these labels? This could be Microsoft 365, this could be emails, this could be meetings. Like I said, if you want to assign it to Teams meetings or Teams channels, you require a Teams premium license. So we're going to untick this scope. Groups and sites, you just need to invoke PowerShell ISE and run a CLI command for AD sync label, and this will allow the groups and sites to be visible and for you then to assign labels to Microsoft 365 collaboration groups and also SharePoint sites. Now, if I go next, this is where we step up slightly. Rather than just classifying a document as internal, highly confidential, external, public, however you want to go about it, we can now apply rights management to the document, which of course we can restrict Copilot from viewing information or referencing information, and also restrict others from viewing and modifying the documents. So we want to select control access. We can apply content marking, which is the watermark and footer, and of course, if we were to protect Teams meetings through encryption and stuff like that, then we'd need that Teams premium license as highlighted here. Right, now we press next. This takes us to the access control configuration. So to get things off, remove access control settings if already applied to items. What that means is if I create a document, let's say, right, outside of information protection, I've encrypted it manually, and once again it's encrypted, I then go ahead and create a label. I then apply that label to that pre-existing document which has already been encrypted previously, right? This label will supersede that existing encryption only if I'm the rights management owner of that document, right? Now, configure access control settings is important. This is where we define the level of permissions people have on the document, right? So I can assign permissions now as an administrator, or I can let the end users assign the permissions as and when they apply the label. Typically, you want to assign permissions now, so you define the encryption settings as part of the label creation, and assign permissions. Now, this is the people who are going to have access to the document as and when they label it with this label we've just created, which is now called label 1. Now, I can select add all authenticated users, which means both corporate users and also business-to-business collaboration users, anyone who can sign in, pretty much. I can define it to individual users, groups, specific domains, or security groups. So I'm going to select all authenticated users, and I'm going to choose the permissions. And this is important from a Copilot perspective because, of course, Copilot requires copy and extract usage rights to be able to reference information. Without this particular permission set here, Copilot can't view, edit, reference information with this applicable label applied, right? So if I did create label 1 and I applied it to a document, right, and it had the encryption of copy and extract usage rights removed, but everything else, Copilot would not be able to reference this document, which is very important. Albeit, this is not the only way we can restrict Copilot from referencing content. We can do that through role-based access control, SharePoint Advanced Management, turning off indexing, SharePoint Restricted Search, and also data loss prevention. There's a whole load of ways we could do the same thing, right? Typical Microsoft. But we can save this or cancel. Now, once you've defined the encryption permissions, we've then got a few options around, access to content expires. So what we're looking at there is retention, right? As and when we apply this label, is there a retention period between when we can access this versus when we can't access this, that type of stuff. And then allow offline access. Do we have to be authenticated? Do we have to have an active access token to be able to view and manage this document? If not, then, of course, we won't have access. Now, what we're going to do to skip to the next part, we're going to go next, and then this is content marking, where we're going to apply watermarks, fine, horizontal, diagonal, what colour do we want the watermark to be, with the font size, and the watermark text, which could be up to 255 characters, right? Now, I don't need to explain that to you, it's self-explanatory. So if we go to the next piece, auto-labeling for files and emails, this is where we can automatically label files based on sensitive information types being referenced, right? And this is that client-side labeling, which I talked about, which is part of Business Premium. So we can say actually content contains sensitive information type of pizza, right? Next, add with a minimum reference count of 2, so we want pizza to be referenced twice, but no more than 5 times. And we want a medium confidence. So we want a balance between false positives and false negatives. Right. Now, I can either have it automatically apply the label or recommend the user applies the label. When we look at recommend the user applies the label, that's what you saw in my demo, where the yellow policy tip was displayed. Automatically applying the label will, of course, mandate that it's applied. So we've got best of both worlds. And, of course, I can display a policy tip. So that's client-side automatic labeling. We then got some extensibility options around conditional access, teams discoverability. We're not going to go into that. And then you create the label. Once you create the label will appear here. You can, of course, create sub-labels, which inherit the scope, right? At this point in time, they're not published to the end user, right? It's only visible to you as an administrator. So how do we go about publishing these labels itself? Well, we go to policies and we create a label publishing policy, and we publish the labels. We select the labels in which we've just created, right? If you've got a sub-label, make sure you select both the sub-label and the default label, or the primary label, and add. Now, we defined earlier the scope of where the labels can be applied. Now, who can apply the labels? This could be individually, this can be part and parcel of groups. We're just going to select all as a scope. And then we've got some self-explanatory options right here, right? Do users have to provide a justification to remove or lower a label's classification? If so, then that's when the priority matrix starts to come into play. Require users to apply a label to their emails and documents. If we were to mandate this, and we'll go to the next step, please don't select internal as default, because of course the option for the users will not then select the appropriate label. So you want to keep that as null or none, so that they have to select from the list, right? Quite self-explanatory from that perspective. Require users to apply a label to their Fabric and Power BI content, right? Don't need to explain that. And provide users with a custom link help page, which is, of course, could be your own custom KB area or knowledge base area, so on and so forth, right? That's just a URL. Now, once you've done that, you define the default labels for each scope you selected at the beginning, right? For emails, you've got the option here, so that if your email is internal and your attachment is highly confidential, the email will inherit highly confidential classification, right? And then you can save and publish. This will then be visible in the client's online and offline desktop apps within 24 to 48 hours, right? It's not instant. Auto-labeling policies is the E5 piece around labeling at scale. Same principle, you set up conditions, you set up rules, and you push that out. Right, I'm not going to show you that because this is a high-level overview. Down here is the classifiers where we did dictate, what's sensitive to our organization. This is where I created that pizza reference for that keyword match. Microsoft also predefined over 300 sensitive information types on your behalf. You can also create fingerprint-based SITs, which are like unique patent templates you want to upload as a sensitive information type, right? It has to be no more than 3 megabyte in size. It can't be password locked. It can't be encrypted. And there's a few other caveats around it. But once again, Microsoft dictate a whole load of different sensitive information types for you on your behalf, which you can use. The problem is you can't delete them, you can't modify them, but you can clone them. Right? Now, if I type in pizza, the sensitive information type I defined earlier, I can test this and make sure it's working as intended by uploading the document, and it will give me a breakdown between low, medium, and high confidence in the amount of matches. I can also see the conditions on the right hand side in regards to actually what I'm looking for. In this case, it's just a keyword match of pizza. Whether or not it's anywhere in the document or within a particular set of characters, it doesn't really matter to me, and there's no supporting elements around that. Now, I can see the matched items, and this is where the list viewer role comes into play, because of course, just because you're a global administrator or a compliance administrator doesn't necessarily mean you have the necessary rights, or you should have the rights to view sensitive information across your business. So you do have to go through that workflow approval to be able to leverage and view this information. Now, I can see, okay, there's a few matches of pizza in OneDrive across my business, across different user accounts. Now, once this loads, we'll see the list of OneDrive accounts against the user profiles. And this does take a few seconds. There we go. And you can see, okay, Rio Hindu has 25 references of pizza in documents. You see pizza sit has been referenced. It's also been labelled highly confidential because pizza has been referenced. Therefore, yeah, we need to see this data. So we can click on document 14, and I should expand the metadata, and I can see actually this document references pizza, and it's been labelled highly confidential due to the fact that it's been, it has pizza in the reference. So yeah, it's a good way to gain visibility in regards to where data lives and being able to view it. I can also see, the document library where this file URL, this file stored, who created the item, the name of the item, so on and so forth. Very useful information. Now, we have got Explorers, sorry, not Explorers, Activity Explorer, where we can see actually what labels being applied, when they've been applied, whether or not people have downgraded labels, how many times have these sensitive information types been referenced in Copilot, whether or not there's been any DLP rule matches, when the classification was stamped. There's a whole load of information we can get from this particular activity report, and we can refine this back or refine this to particular users. Totally possible. Now, if I go to solution areas, we look at DSPM for AI. There's a few prereqs around DSPM for AI or data security posture management for AI. One being activating the Purview audit, which should be on and off. On for most organisations anyway. There was a cut-off point before when it was off to now being on. If not, you can invoke the PowerShell ISC command for set admin audit log config to true, or alternatively go to the audit log pane and select the yellow banner to enable. The second prerequisite is to install the Purview browser extension. Why do we want to do that? Well, we need to gain insights to not only Copilot interactions, but also ChatGPT, Google, Gemini, and Poly interactions. We could do that through Intune. So we can actually type in intune.microsoft.com. And this will take us to the endpoint or Intune portal, right? We can go to devices. We can go to configuration. And we can configuration looks like it's there we go. That took me off slightly. You can see the configuration, and you can see both the Purview browser agent for Edge and Purview browser agent for Chrome. Right, and if I was to click into these configuration profiles, it's just an extension attribute we're pushing out to both browsers. You can see it's been successfully deployed to 15 devices, and the extension attribute we're pushing out is this one here. And this has been silently installed. It doesn't matter if they're in private browser or normal browser, it really doesn't matter. It picks it up on both. And I don't expect you to remember that extension. That is found in the Microsoft Collateral Online, the Microsoft documentation. Right. Once you've pushed that out to the known devices, you've hit that prereq. The third prereq is, of course, to onboard the devices to Microsoft Purview, which is, of course, MDE, right? And we can do that via Intune. We can push out the EDR Sense agent. Very simple. Once again, Intune, endpoint security, EDR, assign that to a scope of devices, and wait for that to propagate. The last one is not a prereq of such. It is just a guide, a tutorial on how to use DSPM for AI. Now, there's a few bits in here we can get out of this, right? One being reports. So we can see interactions around Copilot over the past 30 days. To be honest, very high-level stats, but it's a linear graph. Same principle for Gemini, ChatGPT, and Copilot, right? If we've got a Purview browser extension installed, this is a sandbox instance, so zero telemetry, but you would see exactly what you see for Copilot, but for these third-party generative AI services. When sensitive information types have been referenced in Copilot, so we can see actually pizza's been referenced 15 times in Copilot, and then of course we can ask the question why, and dig deeper. Same principle for labels. If highly confidential is being referenced in Copilot, and we know highly confidential is only labeled to documents, when pizza's been referenced, once again we can look into why and look at the user's interactions and what they prompted and what the output of the prompt is. And we can see the overall coverage of information protection. Now, we've also got out-of-the-box policies, right? So half the challenge is when trying to protect your data estate is trying to figure out where to start. That's the problem, right? And this is why Copilot exists, right? But what we've got here is DSPM for AI, right? And this will give you one-click policies for the respective solution areas, which you could just push out, right? Quite easily, and it gives you an overview of what it does and who it's going to be scoped to and the potential impact. That is, of course, always under consideration. You can see I've pushed out all these policies, some of which are like endpoint DLP, where we can restrict people from copying and pasting sensitive information from your device to ChatGPT. We can monitor communications based on a particular sensitive information type, and we can look at unethical behavior in Copilot and communication compliance. There's a whole load of policies, right? And you'll see these policies in the respective solution areas anyway, but this is just kind of, let's say, a single pane of glass for anything AI usage. Now, other than that, we've got Activity Explorer, and this is really cool because what we can see here is actually what people are using Copilot for, and whether or not they are referencing sensitive information types in Copilot on an individual basis, right? Now, what I can do here is I can select this AI interaction here and see actually 7th of March at 10:55, Rio Hindle had an AI interaction, and this was the prompt and output of that interaction based on my device being onboarded to Defender for Endpoint and the Purview browser extension being installed. So actually, I've asked Copilot to create me a value proposition on, funny enough, I know what this is, Copilot versus ChatGPT, and what was the output of that response. And of course, that was the creation of the document, which it gives you the reference of the document there, which it would take me to, based on me having the relevant privileges. So this is really useful, right? We've also got data assessment reports, which give me a overview of share. So it runs on a weekly basis, right? And it gives me information around how many sharing links exist in a particular SharePoint site, right? Whether or not external sharing's on, how many total sensitive items live in that SharePoint site, how many items exist, how many items have been accessible over the past 90 days, right? This allows me then to prioritize what sites are ready for Copilot and AI adoption. We get a similar report in SharePoint Advanced Management in SharePoint itself called Data Access Governance Reports, which gives us a bit of a better breakdown because this is currently in public preview and is evolving day by day. But that's a quick overview of DSPM for AI. Now, last but not least, we've got DLP. Few scenarios here, and I mean, I've done one of these scenarios in one of my previous videos, so we can create a DLP policy. And like I said, data loss prevention. We can't restrict people from taking data elsewhere, right? Everyone's got a mobile phone in their pocket, and they can take a picture of a screen. But what we can do is fundamentally reduce data exposure. So I'm going to create a policy, and this has to be unique, right? So you have to give it a unique name. It won't allow you to create a policy if it's not unique. We can define admin units. Admin units are just an isolation of administrators. I've created a previous video on that, right? But we can set the scope of, let's say, Copilot, right? And we can scope list individuals once again, groups. And we can say, actually, give us a rule name, rule 1. Content contains a label of highly confidential, which we know is looking for the word pizza, right? Rather than looking for the sensitive information type itself, we're actually looking for the label classification, right? In either message or attachment, we want to prevent Copilot from processing content. Save. Simple as that. So rather than applying encryption to a document and removing the extract users rights from the document so that Copilot can't reference the document, we're actually doing it the other way around, in which we're looking for the label and saying to Copilot, actually, anything with highly confidential, you can't reference, you can't view, you can't comb, right? That's one way of restricting, another way of restricting Copilot. Now, if I go back slightly, we can select another scope of, let's say, Exchange. So once again, scope to users if I need to. This rule is going to be rule 1 again, because we're very imaginative. Conditions. Content contains, either in the message or attachment, doesn't really matter, label, highly confidential with a sublabel secret project, right? Add another condition. Content is shared from, with people outside my organisation, actions, restrict access, and then we're going to block everyone, right? We can enable user overrides for business certification, user notifications, and incident reports. That's totally applicable. What we said there is, anyone sending an email outbound to an external participant, right, or recipient, with a sensitivity label of highly confidential secret project, either in the message or attachment, block completely. They can't do it, right? They'll get an NDR, right? That's another scenario where we could use DLP. Third and finally, devices. So this is endpoint DLP, where we have to define indicators. But for this particular scenario, we don't need to define any indicators because Microsoft's already defined it for us, right? This is quite a simple one again. Content contains sensitive information type of credit card, using a regular expression, right? I don't really care about how many minimum instances or maximum instances of this credit card and the confidence level. I'm not really bothered at this point in time. Action, audit restrict activities on devices, define a sensitive domain, and this domain is going to be any generative AI website, which is already predefined by Microsoft for you, and the control is going to be block. So what we said there is, actually, anyone copying credit card numbers into ChatGPT, right, we can restrict through endpoint DLP, albeit due to my device being onboarded to Defender for Endpoint and the Purview browser extension being installed. We can extend upon that. We can say, actually, you can't put credit card on USB peripherals, which we define as indicators in DLP. Can't share to network shares. You can't print. Once again, there's the art of the impossible. Now, what indicators is this looking for? Well, if we go to org-wide settings, go to DLP, we can actually see the service domains in here. And we can scroll down and we can see generative AI websites, and we can click this URL. And this is the list of AI sites Microsoft are looking for, right? And they created these as indicators, right? So ChatGPT will be there, Amazon Polly, Canva, Gemini, DeepSeek AI is also here. So you don't have to worry about updating manual indicators. Microsoft will do this on your behalf. And as and when they add more and more indicators moving forward, this list will update as well as your policy automatically. But that was a quick one-stop, tour of the Microsoft Purview portal and information protection, DLP, and DSPM for AI. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much.